longest serving senator in Michigan history. The mission of the Levin Center is to advance bipartisan, fact-based oversight and civil discourse as instruments of change. And we do that through a whole series of means, from training congressional staff and state lawmakers and staff in how to do oversight, bipartisan oversight in an in-depth and fact-driven way. We also do a lot of scholarship and research. We hold many different conferences and panels on oversight issues and other issues of public importance. And we're also involved with some legal advocacy, filing amicus briefs with the U.S. Supreme Court, for example, to try to fight for the right of Congress to gather information and do the job of oversight that our Constitution gives it the responsibility to do. So I just wanted to say that about the Levin Center, and I'd like now to just cover a couple of housekeeping matters here. You're in a Zoom meeting. Of course, all of you are experts in Zoom meetings, but I just wanted to ask that if you're not asking a question, if you would keep yourself on mute so we can minimize any distracting sounds. You can also ask questions via the chat function that we have, if you prefer to do it that way. And we would love it if you would tell your fellow students that if they weren't able to join us today, that this session is being recorded and will be available on the Levin Center's website in the events section of our website. So they can come back later and learn all the wonderful things that Eleanor and John are going to share about their careers as inspectors general. And finally, I just want to say that, as I mentioned, one of our major focuses as the Levin Center is to give students an opportunity to learn more about what's happening and career opportunities. And one of the things we do is sponsor an internship program in Washington with congressional investigative committees. And so coming up on November 2nd at noon, we will be holding an online meeting about the application process for the internship program. It's a summer internship, but we begin the application process in the fall of each year. So now I just want to introduce our two panelists. I'm not going to say a lot about their backgrounds because they are going to, part of what they're going to be telling you is how they came to become inspectors general and what that career path is like. But I'm going to introduce them and let them take it away. We have with us first Eleanor Hill, who is a member of the Levin Center's advisory board, and we're very honored that she is. She served as the Inspector General for the Department of Defense from 1995 to 1999, and was vice chair of the overall umbrella group for all inspectors general, the President's Council on Integrity and Efficiency. She has had a lengthy career in law, both working in Congress and in other capacities, and she is now senior counsel at King & Spalding in Washington, D.C. John Roth is a Wayne State University and Wayne Law graduate, and he served as the Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services. Oh, I'm sorry.
Homeland Security.
Homeland Security, excuse me.
I get a little touchy about that.
I'm sure they do. For the Department of Homeland Security from 2014 to 2017. He too has worked in a variety of different fields within the law during his career, which he'll tell you about. And now I think I just want to turn things over. I'm not sure, Eleanor, would you like to go first and talk about your career?
Whatever works best, I'm fine.
Please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I'm glad to be here this morning with all of you. And, I remember well when I was in law school, and I certainly got some very good guidance on where to go and how to start my career, which was particularly helpful because I confess I was not the most focused on my career when I was in law school, unlike many others. But so what I thought I'd do, I know that you all are interested in how we got where we are today and how we got to the IG's office. So I'll start and give you a brief sort of summary of my career, which is Jim mentioned has gone on for a while. I was very fortunate because when I graduated from law school many, many years ago, I was a Floridian. I was born in Miami. I went to Florida State. Undergrad, did very well there and got a fellowship to law school at Florida State. So I went to FSU's law school. At the time, this was back in, I'm dating myself, but I graduated law school in 1974. At that point, women were still coming into the workforce. So there were not a lot of women lawyers, particularly not a lot of women trial lawyers at the time. When I frankly credit one of my law professors with starting me on my career path. And I'm not recommending this, but the truth is, about 3 months before I was ready to graduate from law school, one of my professors literally grabbed me by the arm as I was changing classes one day and said, "Are you planning on working after law school?" Because I had done nothing to get a job. I was really not focused on it. I told him, "Well, yeah, I guess so, but I haven't sent any resumes out." He said, "You come see me after class." So I did. And he got me started down the path of applying for jobs. I had no idea what I wanted to do in law. This was back, I went to law school and college in the 60s and early 70s, late 60s. It was a very different time than it is today, similar in some ways, lots of protests going on. Young people were very energized politically to change the world, to make a difference. So I didn't really know how I was going to do that. He suggested that I apply to a law firm, to a judge for a clerkship, but most importantly to the U.S. Attorney's Office, which I frankly thought I would not like. I didn't think I'd be any good at being a prosecutor, but I listened to him and I sent in all those resumes. I ended up getting interviews, I got offers. And when I talked to him, I came back to him and we talked. He had been an AUSA, Assistant U.S. Attorney, in the beginning of his career. And he strongly urged me to take the U.S. Attorney's Office offer. I resisted. I ended up listening to him, thank goodness, and I became an Assistant U.S. Attorney in Tampa, Florida, right out of law school. I was the only woman in the office. Among the lawyers, they had never had a female prosecutor in Tampa. And I was right out of law school. I was very young. I was on the young side. But I was fortunate to have a lot of great mentors in that office. And I was also fortunate to discover that I actually was pretty good at trying cases. And I actually loved what I was doing, which I would never have predicted that. I did that for about 4 years, tried criminal cases mostly, some civil defense. We worked on some civil cases because it was a small office. And then I got an offer from the Justice Department's Organized Crime Strike Force to leave the U.S. Attorney's Office and go down the street to the Strike Force office and try LCN, La Cosa Nostra cases, and some public corruption cases. And I did so. I really didn't look for that job. It came to me. I had done pretty well. I had won all my cases in Tampa, which was considered pretty good. So they sought me out. They knew me. They had worked with me on issues as an AUSA. And I became a strike force lawyer. I did that for 2 years in Florida, did a couple of major cases, including a big corruption Hobbs Act case where we convicted a member of the governor's cabinet for kickbacks in an environmentally endangered lands program that the state was buying land. So I did some interesting work. And then, again, this isn't because I planned my career, which I did not. Things just tended to happen, and I was very, very lucky. I had a friend of mine who I had worked for in law school in the governor's office in Florida, who was a lawyer, and he had been with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami. And he came through town, took me out to dinner to catch up. we talked. He said, so what are you going to do next? And I had no idea. I liked what I was doing, and I probably would have just stayed there. He suggested he had heard that Sam Nunn, the senator from Georgia, was about to take over the Senate's permanent subcommittee on investigations in Washington, and that Nunn wanted to, at least at the beginning, do congressional investigations of organized crime. And he said, if you would like to do that, this would be a great opportunity. You should send a resume out there. I didn't know anybody on that staff or Nunn, but he knew somebody on the staff, and he said, you know, you've got the perfect background. You're a woman, which again, at that time was a plus in a lot of ways to be a woman in a field that was dominated by men. He said, and you've got the background. You've tried cases. You've been a federal prosecutor. So I sent in a resume. Next thing I knew, I had an interview with Sam Nunn and the chief counsel in Washington, and they hired me as an assistant counsel. And I took the job because I was single. I had no tie. I had great friends, and I loved the people in Tampa and the U.S. Attorney's Office and Strike Force, but I was pretty much free to leave if I wanted to. So I took the job because I loved Washington. I'd always loved it, and I enjoyed politics. And I thought working in the U.S. Senate to me was just like, how exciting is that? That's terrific. So I took the job. I moved to D.C. I spent a year on that subcommittee. For those of you who don't know, Linda Gustitis with the center also served as, followed me. I was there before Linda. She was with Senator Levin on another subcommittee, but we both worked there. She came after I did when Senator Levin took over the committee. So I knew Senator Levin and Linda from my days in the Senate. I worked as an assistant counsel or staff counsel for the subcommittee for about a year. And then, again, another lucky break, the chief counsel left and went back to private practice. He wanted to go into private practice, so he left. When he left, Senator Nunn made me the chief counsel and staff director for the minority on the subcommittee. And I stayed in that job till several years later. The Democrats, that was the Democratic side of the committee, they took the Senate. When they took the Senate majority, I became the chief counsel and staff director for the whole subcommittee because we were running the subcommittee, the Democratic majority. So I did that. I stayed with PSI, which is the acronym for that subcommittee. And I should tell you, for those of you who wouldn't know, that subcommittee goes back to the days after Harry Truman and the war effort committee that he had. It was created because Truman had done such a good job investigating fraud in the war effort after World War II. They created PSI, our subcommittee, and it was given a very broad jurisdiction to do any kind of congressional investigations, whether it was fraud and abuse and programs, government programs, organized crime, health, public safety, whatever. And over the years, that subcommittee has done, in my view, some of the most professional, in-depth inquiries on a wide variety of topics over the years. And that's why I loved working there. It was a terrific job. I never thought I'd get a better job. And I stayed there for a long time. I was there almost 15 years. At 15 years, again, this was more luck than anything else. And maybe people knew me, that might have had something to do with it. But Bill Clinton became president, and he was there from 93 to 95. And in 95, or I guess in 94, it was late 94, the White House called me in the Senate and asked if I would agree to be nominated for the DoD IG, Department of Defense Inspector General. I initially told them no. I wasn't interested because I loved my job in the Senate, and I got along with Sam Nunn really well. We had a good team. And I enjoyed doing what I was doing. I had also, the more important issue was that I had also just become a first-time mother. I had a toddler at home, and I really didn't want to run all over the world for the Defense Department and leave my 2-year-old at home. So I almost didn't take it. A lot of people told me I was crazy, my friends. They said, you should take this job, it's terrific. And I decided I would go be interviewed by John Deutsch, who at the time was the Deputy Secretary of Defense. He later became the director of the CIA, because the White House wanted me to do that and really was pushing me to take the job. I went over to talk to Deutsch, and as a woman, for those of you who are women in the audience, I was, contrary to people's advice, I did the opposite. I went over there and opened the interview by telling him I'm flattered to be here, but you need to know, if I take this job, I know I can do this job. I know how to do investigations. I know IGs because I've worked with them in the Senate. But I'm not going to do a lot of travel. I'm not going to be going on 3-week trips abroad to look at Army bases or military facilities or whatever. I'm going to do the job from Washington because my 2-year-old is the most important to me right now. And I fully expected and told him, you know, if that's not what you want, that's fine. I understand it. I just wanted to be upfront about that. And he immediately looked at me and said, that's great. We can work with you. We want you in this job. So I took it. And that's how I became the IG at Defense. I did it for 4 years. It was a very good job for me because we did audits, investigations. It also gave me a lot of management experience because at that time, the Defense Department IG was the biggest IG in the federal government. We had 1,500 or 1,600 people. We had a lot of investigations going on, a lot of audits, and a lot of things. So it was very busy, but it gave me a lot of management experience. I did it for 4 years. After 4 years, I had still not done private practice. And Sam Nunn, by 4 years later, when I was at the end of my IG term, not at the end, but I'd been there for 4 years, he approached me because he had gone to King & Spalding, a big Washington law firm. We have a big Washington office, but also based in Atlanta. And he had retired from the Senate. He was going to King & Spalding and asked me to come with him. I, again, hemmed and hawed on that, but ended up doing it. I figured that was the best time for me to do that. I went to King & Spalding. I worked with Nunn, and we represented companies in congressional investigations and individuals for about 3 years. I'm almost to the end. 3 years. After 3 years, 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, of course, the whole country was shook, was terrified at what had happened. The country was at risk. There were a lot of questions about why our intelligence community didn't prevent this or know about this ahead of time, and our law enforcement community. And what happened, again, I did not look for this, but I was sitting in my office one day and I got a call from Senator Bob Graham, who at the time was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and Congressman Porter Goss, who at the time was the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. And they were asking me to come up and be interviewed by the two of them and by their ranking members on both those committees, which in the Senate was Richard Shelby from Alabama, and in the House was Nancy Pelosi, who at that time was the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee in the House. They wanted to interview me to see if I would, if they wanted to ask me to serve as the staff director of what was called the Joint House and Senate Intelligence Committee's joint inquiry into the review of what happened in 9/11 with respect to the intelligence community activities. In other words, this was going to be a joint bicameral House-Senate investigation of why our intelligence community did not identify ahead of time and prevent the 9/11 attacks, and what we could do going forward to make sure that we were addressing the threat in a way that would protect the American people going forward. I went up for that interview. They offered me the job. They wanted me to come back. And that is the one job, given the time and history of what was going on and given my affinity for investigative work. I love to do investigations. I've done my whole career. That was the one time I didn't hesitate at all. I basically told them, yes, I will do this, and we'll do it the right way. And I told the firm I was leaving, and they said, they were great that I was doing that, but they obviously said, when you finish, come back to us and we'll talk, and we'd love to have you back. So I left the firm and I went to the Senate and House. I was supposed to be up there about 8 months. It ended up, I stayed there for about a year and a half. We had a very long and I think successful investigation. It was the first investigation of the 9/11 attacks, and it laid the ground, the work we did in intelligence laid the groundwork for what the 9/11 Commission, which was later created based on our work, to do in areas other than intelligence, like NORAD, defense, air defense, emergency response, visas, all of those other issues. So I did that. After that, I ended up coming back to the firm, and I was a partner at the firm for the whole time I was there, up until this last February, when I finally decided, after talking about it for a year or so, that I was going to at least retire on a hopefully a full basis. Firm convinced me to stay on a semi-retired basis. So I'm no longer a partner. I've retired from the partnership, but I'm still associated with them to some degree, in that I'm a senior counsel and I work on certain matters, but I have a lot more control over my schedule, and I'm enjoying it a lot more. So that is a long way of getting through 45 years in law. So that's how I.
Thank you so much. I want to, just in the interest of time and wanting to get to John, I know we'll have more time for Q&A, and I know a lot of our students will want to ask questions and get into more of a conversation. But John, before I turn it over to you, I thought it would be a good idea to just describe what, I think for some of us, not everybody's going to really know in advance here what an inspector general does. So the job of an inspector general, John, would you kick off just by saying, just by giving your perspective, and then Eleanor, add or subtract or give your thoughts on what the job really is.
Sure. And this is one in which I think popular culture almost gets it right, which is we are the watchdogs. The idea is that we are a member of the agency, and technically, although only technically, report to the head of the agency, while at the same time retaining independence to look at all the programs and operations of that agency, whether it be through criminal investigation, whether it be through audit, inspection, or other means. So what we really are is a method to assure Congress, because we report both to the head of the agency as well as to Congress, but it's a method to ensure that the head of the agency and Congress are satisfied that the agency is doing things the right way.
Eleanor, anything you would add to that?
I think that's absolutely right. To me, the biggest single point about the IG position is I think it is unique in the federal government, and given that it has independence. It sits in the executive branch, and it's able to do all those things John said about the investigations, and to do them credibly because it's independent. And the way Congress decided to do that, they do a lot of things wrong, but this is one where I think they got it right. They created the IG. It sits administratively within a department or agency. I, for instance, sat within the Department of Defense, but it has a statutory obligation to keep the US Congress fully and currently informed and report to the Congress. The Secretary of Defense, when I was IG, did not review my testimony to Congress. They did not review and advance our reports. They did not edit what we told Congress. And the tension between Congress, reporting to Congress, and also reporting to the Secretary is the secret that allows you as the IG to be independent. And when you're independent, you can conduct thorough, professional, and fair investigations. And that, to me, is what's most important about it.
Great. So that level sets for everybody, what the job entails. John, now please.
Can I ask one question and just interject? John, could you just explain what kind of jobs are available for attorneys in inspector general offices?
Sure. I mean, I think attorneys have the skill set, regardless of whether it's a legal position or a non-legal position. The great thing about law school and the great thing about being a lawyer is that it sharpens your ability to gather facts and conduct analysis. So we hire people as lawyers, of course. We have a independent sort of legal shop that's independent from the agency itself, so we can get unbiased and independent legal advice. But we also have investigators, auditors, all sorts of people who are the who, what, why, how type of people who go and look at agency operations and programs. And I will have to say the most successful people we have are in fact lawyers who are not technically practicing law, but are doing the kinds of analytical work that law school prepares you for.
Super. So John, why don't you tell us about your pathway to becoming an IG?
Sure. So I am a proud graduate of Wayne and Wayne Law School, graduating in 1835. So it's been an interesting run for me. I knew I wanted to do something in litigation, largely because of a summer job I got after my first year in law school with a landlord-tenant court. They had a program in which you would be, quote, supervised, now I'll use air quotes for the supervision, and actually have clients litigate cases, try cases to verdict, bench trial verdicts, as a first-year law school and law student. And I realized after the summer of doing that, it was one of the most invigorating and exciting professional experiences I've ever had, because it allowed you to refine the kinds of skills and determine the kind of lawyer you want to be. And for me, I caught the bug, which was litigation. I clerked for a judge in the Sixth Circuit right after law school, and realized that the only people I saw that were having fun on a day-to-day basis were the lawyers at the Department of Justice. So I really set my eyes on becoming an assistant U.S. attorney or going to main justice in Washington, D.C. I did that in a couple ways. One, I got lucky in the summer after graduation, but before the clerkship, I decided I wasn't going to take the bar exam. And instead, I was going to do a internship at the Civil Division of the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. And that gave me some insights into what the department was like. It gave me a fun summer in Washington, D.C. Right after graduating from law school. And it relieved me of the burden of actually taking the bar exam right after law school. So I was lucky that way. But I spent a year in a private law firm in Detroit, Dickinson Wright, and then was able to get a job in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Detroit, where I did that for 7 years, doing a lot of different things. Appellate was my first job there for about 2 years, and then I went into sort of general crimes, which was the largely violent crime, firearm offenses, and then ultimately to narcotics. All my cool cases in Detroit ended in Miami, where their cases started. So I decided that it would be fun to go to Miami and be a narcotics AUSA there. And I did that for 5 years, was ultimately the head of the narcotics section there. So it was an invigorating time for 5 years in the late 90s, working 1 million hours a week, trying cases, supervising other lawyers who were doing the same thing. We called it the Southern District of Florida, but realistically it was the Northern District of South America. And it was a very sort of invigorating and terrific time to do that. From there, I went to DC in a policy job because I really wanted to start to think about a career in government. Now, of course, I'd been in for almost, at that point, 12 years. So only then if it's like thinking about the government or my career. Mostly it was about having fun, and trying cases was a lot of fun for me. But at some point you had to sort of think about, well, do you want to do this for the rest of your life, or is there something else you want to do? So I really set an internal goal that I'd want to do some kind of policy work in DC, likely with the Department of Justice, because that's where I was. So I got a job in the criminal division as the chief of narcotics and dangerous drugs section there, ultimately moved over to the asset forfeiture and money laundering section as the chief there. Was basically doing DC headquarters type work for about 5 years or so in the criminal division, but also in the Deputy Attorney General's office, which is the #2 person in the Department of Justice as the chief of staff there, in what was a political position, but I was a career person that was able to get that job. Ultimately, I left the department and was the chief of investigations, criminal investigations at the Food and Drug Administration, doing investigations on counterfeit pharmaceuticals, which was an interesting sort of turn for me. So instead of being the lawyer and receiving sort of the work product of criminal investigators, I was actually leading the criminal investigative agency, which was something different for me. And that was all fun and everything, but again, my goal was to engage in some policy work and try to make the government a better place. I had heard through the grapevine that the position of Inspector General for DHS was open. And as it turns out, during that time that I was working in the criminal division at the Department of Justice, somebody I dealt with a lot in the course of my work there became President Obama's counsel. So was in the White House counsel's office. And from that, I was able to basically call up and say, so I hear this is open. Is there any sort of opportunity there, or do you have a candidate? And they didn't have a candidate. And literally, it was about 10 days between the time I first made the call and the time I got an offer, or an offer for an offer is what it is, because the background investigation of that is pretty rigorous. And ultimately sort of nominated by President Obama, confirmed by the Senate, and did that for 4 years. And it was an outstanding job because it fulfilled the goal I had early on in my career, which was I wanted to have a policy job in Washington to try to affect change and make government better. And there's very few places like the Inspector General's office to do that. So, you know, when I was invited to do this, the invitation was, well, you know, how did you become IG? And it was really by accident. And, you know, it's a little hard to sort of take my experience and translate it to yours. I could say, well, yeah, you should work with somebody who is ultimately going to be White House counsel. And that would be like a good piece of advice, but I'm not sure how like transferable that is to sort of your everyday thing. So I was able to sort of boil this down into 3 points, because we're lawyers and lawyers always love things that are in 3 points. So I think the first point is you can have a career plan, but realize that no career plan ever survives your first job. The job of IG didn't exist when I graduated from Wayne State. It's likely that a very satisfying career for you has a position that does not yet exist. So just understand that you can plan your career and you can do those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, flexibility is super important. And I think you heard that from Eleanor, who was talking about sort of some of the random things that happened to her that got her the offers that she got. So just keep that in mind, that you can plan, but don't over plan, because it's very unpredictable. The second is that flexibility is key. I was able to go from Detroit to Miami because I had the geographic flexibility to do that. I was able to get the head of the narcotics section job in Miami, and from that was able to parlay that into a policy job in Washington, D.C. If I hadn't had that flexibility, I'm not 100% sure that that would have happened. Likewise, I had flexibility with regard to taking a position at the landlord-tenant court for functionally free, as opposed to taking a paying job. And that taking that job allowed me to understand what it was that I was good at and what it is that I like to do, which was try cases and be in a courtroom environment. And the third thing, I think the most important thing, is understand that everyone you meet is a potential job interview. The woman I worked with, who ultimately became Obama's counsel, was just another lawyer in the Department of Justice, and I had no reason to believe that she would go off and do like important things and be a significant, have such an significant impact in my life. So, you know, when you talk about like networking and doing those kinds of things, you know, networking is important, but the most important network is one in which people can see the quality of work that you bring to whatever it is that you do. And that to me is the biggest piece of advice I can give anybody, is to be flexible and understand that everybody you meet is a possible connection sometime down the road. And that's it. I retired from the government after 32 years and went into private industry as a compliance officer. Right now I'm working with Fannie Mae, which is the largest secondary mortgage market in the country, with $5 trillion under investment, and a full plate in ensuring that they comply with all the laws and regulations that they're required to follow.
Well, Eleanor, John, those were wonderful comments, and I think you anticipated, I think, some of the questions that I'm sure the students have about, about what this pathway might look like and what an IG does. I want to encourage any student to provide a question, or either write it or just raise your hand and unmute yourself, or we'll unmute you if you're muted. Did you have a question, Marie?
No, you guys were very thorough. Sorry, I didn't know if I was using my hand. Sorry. Not very aware.
Don't do that during an auction.
Right, they can cost you a lot of money.
I appreciated the comment that you made, John, about flexibility. That's something I've been thinking a lot too. And
yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always thought about in looking at a job is, does this job open options or does it close options? And I always tried to pick the job that opened options rather than closing them.
I'm wondering if you could also speak, both of you, to the difference between, and Eleanor, you've been in both, the public service versus private work, the pros and cons of that.
Well, don't get me wrong. I've been with King & Spalding for a long time, almost 20 years if you add it up between the time I left and came back. And it's a great firm, and I've met some great people there, and I've got the opportunity. It's given me the perspective of the private sector and the companies and people in that, the way they view government compared to the government perspective, which I got from being in the Justice Department and the Senate and in the IG's office at DOD. To me, the main difference is in the private sector. First of all, on the investigative side, in the private sector, I represent people and companies who are being investigated by the government. On the government side, I led those investigations. So to me, the difference is, I enjoy the private sector work, but I think on the private side, you're defending someone. So you're responding to the government on everything, and you're trying to keep up with the investigation. On the government side, you're actually leading or running that investigation or being involved in it, and you're following the leads. And my own personal, after all these years, when I look back at what I really enjoy the most, I think I can tell myself, I enjoy following the leads and figuring out the investigation and seeing where the facts are and seeing if you can prove the facts. So that, for me personally, I'm probably a better fit in the government side of the house on this because of just the nature of what you do. I think financially, the private sector is much more lucrative in terms of if you're looking down the road at your own financial well-being and your families and everything else. Certainly lawyers on the private side can make a lot of money. And government lawyers can make money, but not certainly at the high ends in terms of the private sector. So the financial aspect is a difference. That's probably a plus on the private side. I would say the big difference on the government side is you're not, and again, this is a personal thing. It depends on how your own values and your own way you look at things. But on the government side, there really are people in government, and I've seen it all over government over the years. Not everybody's perfect, but a lot of them are really there because they believe in what they're doing and to try to move the country forward in a positive way. And whether you're doing criminal cases as a prosecutor and you're trying to serve justice, or whether you're trying to handle policy that the IG gets involved in, sometimes you're trying to make things better, to make a difference. I think if that's important to you, you'll feel more fulfilled on the government side, whereas that's not the role of the private sector. The role of the private sector is mostly to defend and deal with regulatory issues or whatever for various private sector entities, and to defend people. If you're defending individuals in criminal cases, then I would say in that kind of practice, you do get some of that. I'm here to do the right thing for this individual. If you believe in your client and you're trying to get your client treated fairly and justly by the system, then you get a little of it there too. So, but that's a difference. You know, you're not, I think you find a lot more people in government talking about this is the right thing to do for the country. We've got to do this because we're serving this group of people or this group or whatever. And on the private side, you serve your client and you're dealing with your client. So it's not on the grand scale. It's individual clients. Whereas, you know, I worked in justice, defense, but I also worked in Congress. And of the three of them, when you're in Congress, you know, your scope of what you're looking at is very broad. You're looking at policy, not just one agency, but all of the agencies. So the issues you deal with are broader.
I want to get to a question. Eleanor, thank you for that. I think everybody appreciated that a lot, but I believe we had a question from Nathan. Is that correct? Nathan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Not so much as a career advice question, but as much as a Eleanor, I know that you talked about like La Cosa Nostra investigations, and John, right, you were talking about narcotics investigations in the 90s. That is just so in the realm of like so cool action movie kind of lawyer stuff. What did that feel like? What was it going? What did it feel like going to work every day, knowing that you were part of these like massive, huge, you know, investigations? It just sounds so out of the realm of wow-ness that, I don't know, it just.
Well, you know, for me, I mean, I never pictured, you know, when I was in law school, I never thought about me prosecuting organized crime cases. That was not something I thought about or even imagined. But, you know, when you're involved, I mean, it's fascinating work. I mean, it can be dangerous sometimes. When I was in Tampa, we had a law enforcement individual at the state, a detective at the state level who was actually killed. They blew up a bomb in his house and he was killed, and that was traced back to, you know, organized crime. There were issues with, you know, you had to be careful. I was so young at the time I did that. I mean, I was probably 26 or so, 27 maybe. And, you know, and I didn't personally feel threatened, but I did get to know several organized crime figures on a far more personal basis because they were our witnesses. You know, the government, when they try these big mob cases, you know, it's a pretty standard approach. You don't start at the top, you start at the bottom and start turning witnesses that are going to testify against the higher ups. And that certainly was true in LCN families. So I did spend some time debriefing and interviewing again, a lot of different LCN people, and you get an understanding of what those people are like and what their organization is like. So it's an interesting thing, but it's not, you know, and I think, you know, the mob is not as powerful today as it was 20, 30 years ago. The FBI really gets a lot of credit for their cases where they went after the different mob families over the course of many years and were very successful. So things have changed a little, but it's, you know, it's an interesting area. There's a lot of authors out there that write books about it, and, you know, and, but again, it's not something I've thought about as a student, certainly. And it just happened, you know, and I ended up doing that for several years.
Jim, I think you're on mute.
excuse me. All right. So one question I think that comes out of this dialogue from both of you is that the Inspector General's position is, is a obviously a very high level position. It's a if not a capstone, it's a very much of a high level position. For students who are, coming out of law school, would it make sense to pursue a job working for the IG, in one of the departments, or would you think it's a better route to, pursue something else you're interested in?
Well, it's always nice if you have a choice. A lot of times you don't. And again, I would go with criteria. What are you good at? What is fun? What will open options for you as you move along? To sort of amplify what Eleanor said, I mean, working in public service is the funnest thing you can possibly do. And one of the things it does, Nathan, it gives you terrific stories. I mean, I have a zillion different stories about like undercover operations or big takedowns in Miami, or, after 9/11, I was doing a lot of sort of counterterrorism sort of work. It gives you terrific stories. So I think any job that gives you responsibility early, that hits all the skill sets that you have, will prepare you for something that, for a job that doesn't exist. Because as I said, the IG didn't exist when I graduated from law school, and I didn't really know about the IGs and what they did until probably, a couple years, maybe 5 years before I actually got the job. So, you're going to live long and interesting lives. You have to be flexible about what it is that you look for, and sort of pick the jobs that suit your skill set and that give you the opportunity to make a difference.
And I would just chime in on what John said about, the way you get experience. I mean, some jobs you get more experience sooner than later. And I would say, I think John was certainly suggesting this, I think in government, you get a lot of responsibility very fast compared to the private sector. I think that a lot of times in the private sector, you're really carrying books and doing research and, doing document reviews. Whereas if you're in the U.S. Attorney's Office, you're going to be trying cases. I mean, the truth of it is, when I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in January or February, I think, and I was as a clerk for 3 months till I passed the bar. I was there, following the AUSAs and everything. But by May, the day I was sworn into the bar in May, I went to Lakeland, Florida, got sworn in, but I had to be back by 11:30, 12 o'clock, because when I got back, I was running a preliminary hearing before the federal magistrate in the courtroom. And within a few weeks, I was trying cases in the courtroom. So you wouldn't get that, that's very quick. There's not a lot of time there. You get experience, you either sink or swim, and you learn how to do it because you're doing it right away. Yeah. So that's a big difference.
And not just federal work. I mean, state work is the same way. We ran into a lot of people who are in state's attorney's offices or district attorney's offices that get terrific experience early on, that then you can leverage those skills into all sorts of stuff, including the IG's office.
I think what's also interesting is you both referenced several times how much fun you had in your work, that was an essential or beneficial part of your work. And so many times I think law students feel they just got to get a job, and then, then they get stuck in it, and then you stay with it because you've got some experience in it. On the long haul, you want to do something that gives you pleasure, that is fun, where you go to work and you go, do I really get paid for this? That to me, I think both of you have reflected that was a really important element. But I also think it'd be important if you could, what's a day-to-day situation like for somebody who would be working in an inspector general's office? If you're an attorney, you're doing, you're gathering information, you're interviewing people, are you kind of like taking depositions, and what are the elements?
Yeah, I mean, so it's really into two. If you're on an investigative team, for example, you would be advising the investigative team of some, sort of policies and procedures that you have to follow, or, basically doing the craft of lawyering for a client. Or you could be an investigator yourself, which would be, in TV, it's always exciting, right? Because you see people jumping around, but a lot of it is like, oh, here's the third box of documents that I have to go through to see if there's anything relevant in those documents. I mean, there's a lot of that. And it, you know, the great thing about DHS was because the mandate was so broad, you never got bored. I mean, it might be, okay, we're going to audit sort of FEMA payments to a specific contractor one time. Another time it's going to be, oh, we're going to run a covert investigation of TSA and see if we can sneak bombs through their metal detectors. Yeah, every day is different. And again, sort of flexibility and those sort of core skills that you get of analysis, fact finding are super important. And that's what sort of law school gets you.
You know, one of the things that strikes me about both of your comments is how much your careers have jumped from different branches of government, not just the private sector, but actually, you know, you've managed to be, you know, working in the executive branch, working as, you know, in sort of the prosecutorial side of things, but then also in other aspects of the executive branch, then in the legislative branch, and then and in some cases in the judiciary. So a lot of people who are thinking about a legal career think, oh, well, if I go in one direction, you know, if I go and start working in the court system, that's where I'm going to be. And yet, I know, Eleanor, in your case, and I think John, yours too, you got recruited. You know, you did a good job, as John said. You know, you treated your interactions with people as if, you know, that could be a future interview. You know, that's somebody you might work with in the future, and that paid off because it allowed you to pursue your values and your interests beyond just one branch of government. There's a great deal of government out there for lawyers who are interested in it and who find it, you know, really fun.
Yeah, you know, I think I agree with what you said and what John said on this, but I'll just, and the proof of that is I tell our son, who is 28 and he's in the workforce now, has his MBA, but he's still trying to figure out where he wants to ultimately go and the kinds of questions we're talking about. I tell him two things. I said, the most important things from your career in terms of moving ahead and doing well is, one, you have to excel at what you do. You have to be dependable. You have to do your job well. You have to be careful and attentive to it and make sure you do the best job you can do. That's the first thing. And two, you have to get along with people, and you don't have to be best friends with everybody, but everybody you work with, you don't know who they are or where they're going to go from here, but it always pays to be the team player, to work well with people so that people not only work well with you, they enjoy you. And that's how, to me, I think that's the solution for your name being floated and creating, you don't even realize, by doing a good job and by getting along with the people you work with and leaving a good impression, you end up creating opportunities for yourself years later, when through the grapevine somebody talks about you and you get asked about a job or something like that. So it's, you know, those are the two things I stress to him all the time. So, and I think it works.
I want to make sure that everybody knows, please, you're welcome to ask any questions about anything you're hearing or things you're not hearing. So please chime in with any questions. One thing I think this really illustrates, you know, both the stories you all have been telling, is that Washington, D.C. is a place where being in the mix and going and working in one place can really create a lot of opportunities, and it can be a very fun place to work at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a small town at the end of the day. And, you know, what Eleanor said about, you know, doing a good job, and then years later, somebody remembers that, because at some point it is a small town, at least in sort of the fields that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like I ran into Eleanor in 2003, I believe it was, for the first and only time. But I mean, that just shows you sort of randomly how it is that people sort of run into each other in various ways. And it's exciting work. This is the center where things are happening. And if you have the geographic flexibility, it's a terrific opportunity.
David, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, you're more than welcome to disagree with the premise of the question. I want to preface it by saying that it's just my experience and understanding of the world. I was born in 1989, and it seems to me that everything in government has gotten worse over the course of, like, since I was born. The experience of the average American is much tougher. Income levels lower, the diseases of despair, government corruption, de facto segregation, undemocratic government, less personal freedom, climate change, all that stuff. There are exceptions, the demise of La Cosa Nostra, for example, but it seems like most things are just worse, regardless of whatever political party is in charge and the good intentions of the people in government. Is two individuals who've really had their fingers on the levers of power. I'd imagine that you have some interesting insights into how that happened, why it's happened, and what people who are thinking about government can do to change it.
Okay, I'll bite. A couple things. One, I do mildly disagree with the premise. I think I was a history major in undergrad, so having historical perspective on sort of where we are as a nation, I think is important. I mean, there's no question that this is an interesting and challenging period of our time. Whether we're in some sort of doom spiral, we'll see. Certainly everything is magnified as a result of our technological capability to transmit to millions of people our very thoughts, whether or not they're well considered or not. There's always been a lot of corruption. There's always been a lot of anti-democratic principles within the United States government, and any student of history is going to tell you that. But I won't get there. But I will hit on one point, which is as society gets more complex, I think government has failed to keep up with that complexity. So when you think about, for example, it's the 737 MAX incident, right? So the Federal Aviation Administration has a gold-plated reputation, or had a gold-plated reputation for being a regulator who understood the airline industry, had safety as its first and only priority. And yet you have, what was fairly clearly the ability of the airline itself, or the air manufacturer itself, to be able to push through an airplane that was clearly unsafe. And I think the reason behind a lot of that is because the technological sophistication of the aircraft outstripped the ability of the FAA to actually regulate in a thoughtful way. So what you ultimately end up with is this sort of bizarre kind of self-regulation where you're letting the airplane manufacturers themselves certify airworthiness as opposed to doing it yourself. So you're really not watching anymore, you're watching the watchers. And I think that's a very dangerous development. When I was at the Food and Drug Administration, the same thing happened for food manufacturers. There was this whole push to get these industry certifications. And if you were industry certified, you were basically not inspected anymore. You were basically trusted by the FDA to comply with a host of regulations with regard to food safety. I think that's super dangerous, but as we get more complex in how it is that we have to deal with things, I think privacy is another instance in which that happens. I think that's a huge challenge for the government and our society to try to figure out, because you can't get the kinds of scientists and engineers that you need to be able to effectively regulate, given the complexity of some of these products that are coming out.
We also have had that in Congress, where the congressional staff has decreased dramatically over the years, but the amount of issues and money involved and the number of people in the country and our programs have increased exponentially. And so Congress is trying to deal with the new world with very old tools. And it even eliminated what it had was called the Office of Technology Assessment, which existed to try to inform Congress about developments in technology. And they eliminated it in 1995. And it's been terrible since. I mean, you've seen some of these hearings where the senators don't even know what an iPhone is or how you use it, and yet they're supposed to regulate Apple or at least consider regulating Apple and Facebook and YouTube and TikTok. So the resources, we've got to get the resources to the people who are planning the policy and executing. John's point is the executing the policy.
I would just add, in my career, both working in Washington as a congressional staffer and also working in the private sector and then representing people in Michigan and the Michigan legislature, I used to say, and David, I think your point is well taken. If you were born in 1989, your entire life, we've really been in the sway of a philosophy about government that views the government as kind of the enemy or as a central part of the problem. And I used to say, when people would get really frustrated with government not working, I'd say, well, if you elect people who hate the government, you're going to end up with a government you hate. and that's been a big part of what we've had over really certainly my lifetime. I kind of came of age politically during the Reagan years, in the 1980s. And, Ronald Reagan came to town telling people that, the scariest 7 words in the English language were, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And I wonder now if we aren't in a situation where, in the context of a global pandemic that has really tested that philosophy. And, I don't know, and this is not to be a partisan at all, but just to say, is the approach we've been taking to government held up very well in this particular instance? And I think the answer is obviously no, compared to other countries that maybe have a somewhat different attitude about government. So it's a very good question, and it's one that as you move through your career, let's say in various aspects of government, learning how it looks from different sides. Eleanor and John have both spent time in the private sector and in multiple branches of the government, and there's nobody has the whole answer here, but having experience in different aspects of the government gives you the ability to maybe be a better critic and problem solver when the time comes. Do we have any additional questions? I'm checking to see. We are coming up. We've got a few more minutes left.
I would just add one other thing, and that is that's why we do these panels on careers in public service, to encourage Wayne Law students to think about public service as a career for yourselves, to help improve government, to make it the country work better. So that's part of the thinking behind these career panels.
Absolutely. And I do want to put in another plug, and I want to acknowledge Marie Karp, who raised her hand earlier, is one of your fellow students who experienced our summer internship program this past summer, working remotely, unfortunately, but still having an experience working with a congressional investigative committee. And for those of you who are interested in that program, there will be an opportunity, and I think, Margot, I think you posted the link to sign up for a November 2nd session we're having to tell you all about the opportunity and answer any questions that you might have. We're hoping, again, this is well beyond our control, that maybe next summer it will be possible to work side by side with people in Congress and not just over Zoom
Yeah.
and the internet.
Let's hope.
Well, Eleanor and John, do you have any closing remarks or anything you'd like to just share with the group in terms of how you viewed, your experiences and any final thoughts about advice you would give to students who are looking at what happens after law school?
I'll just reflect on being a Wayne Law grad and coming to DC for a summer job and then an internship or a clerkship for a federal judge. You have all the tools it takes to succeed in anything that you want to do. I was able to come to DC and supervise people with Ivy League law degrees after your first job, and arguably not even then. it doesn't matter. What matters is, we're still in a meritocracy. It's what you bring to the job that counts, and it isn't about sort of what your degree is. So you are all well served and are well equipped to whatever adventure you decide to take on. And you can take that from a fellow Wayne grad.
Thank you, John. I'm also a Wayne law grad and had a fabulous career in Washington, D.C. in public policy as well, and never felt that I was missing any tool or education that I needed to do the job.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I obviously didn't go to Wayne Law and not, Michigander, but I went to Florida State. Florida State, I think, is a great school. It's not an Ivy League school, and my FSU degree never hurt me in Washington. I mean, I think it really goes, as we talked about several times, it's what you bring to the table. Do people recognize your work as good, as dependable, as credible? And can they work with you? Do they like you? Can they work with you? And those two things, to me, if you stick to that throughout your whole career, you'll find that your work will be recognized and you'll create opportunities for yourself without even knowing it. So, and there are a lot of opportunities in law. It's a very broad career path. There are many different paths you can take as a lawyer, some of them doing legal work, some of them not doing legal work, but in all different areas. So, you really have a very exciting futures ahead of you. I think you'll all do fine. Just, stick to what works for you and make your work for others, and you'll be okay.
Well said. Well, I want to be sensitive. I know a lot of students have 1:30 classes, and we're coming up to a few minutes before that starts. So I want to thank Eleanor and John for providing wonderful comments and experiences, and I hope everybody enjoyed as much as I did hearing about your career paths and hearing your thoughts about government and what a career in government is like. Please, for any of you who are interested in doing work, and following what the Levin Center is doing and getting involved with what we're doing here, please subscribe to, let us know, and we'll put you on our listserv so you can receive information that we're producing about our various projects. And with that, I think we can adjourn our meeting, and thank you all again, and we'll see you in the near future.
Thanks, Eleanor. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Enjoyed
Take
it.
care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.